Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. We have a special guest I will introduce very shortly. Just a quick bit of a family party news. You've probably seen on social media. We've been able to Stornoway for a meeting on Friday night. Saw some people on Saturday there as well. The ferries, the sea was rough. It was very windy. So we went a day early to make sure we got there. And it's a good job we did because the ferries were cancelled that we would have gone on. So Neil Deepnarayan and I went over. Phil Tanzer and Dave Bester were going to come as well, but they couldn't make it with the ferry changes. But it's good to see people over there, good to see our supporters and to meet some new people as well. Something else we've been working on is if you're a member of the family party or a regular donor and you didn't come to the conference, then we've been packing up your envelopes with the various books of the literature in for you. So my living room is buried in envelopes at the moment. Huge mountain of them, but they'll be on their way to you before too long. Do keep the comments coming in this evening. Hello, Bruce. Right, so so I will introduce this evening's guest, and this evening's guest is YouTuber Tailed Feature, who's a sort of social commentator, bit of a comedian. Well, let's ask him exactly how he describes himself. Oh, well, right, welcome.
Good evening, Richard.
How would you describe your online presence?
I'll try and keep it family-friendly language. So I suppose social commentary was how I started off. I suppose now I've kind of gone the way of similar sort of content, but being more podcast-based, in that I do a weekly live stream now, talking about some of the lesser discussed stories throughout the UK during the week, and I like to dabble in a bit of comedy, a bit of satire, especially musical satire as well on occasion, as well as I've done a completely separate YouTube channel now with sort of historical videos and things like that as well. So a bit of a mishmash, but there we go. That's about it.
We've entered the comedy song market as well a little bit. We've our Southwest chairman did a song for us in the election. He's actually done another one. Should be going on social media soon. But I've heard a few of your songs. Yeah, very amusing. Now, have I got this right? I haven't watched this video. Did I see you'd made a video about a duel, the last duel in Scotland or something?
That's correct. Yeah, I did that on my second channel. So lots of historical subjects, and the last duel in Scotland was the last one that I did there.
Okay, so just give us a quick report. I'm intrigued. Who, what, when, where?
All right, okay. 1826, dueling had been officially made illegal in the UK at that time, just a few years prior to that. And essentially there was a banker in Kirkcaldy, and he was notorious for getting into arguments with, well, just about anybody pretty much. And eventually he managed to pick a fight with a local merchant, a flax merchant, who challenged him to a duel. And because this banker had actually had a history in the military, he thought, he'd be absolutely fine. The other guy didn't actually want to be involved in the duel. He'd never fired a gun in his life, but it was all about honor. It was all about reputation and everything like that. So yeah, this David Landale shot the banker dead, did a runner, and reported back to his friends in the Kirkcaldy area, basically saying what his side of the story was. Basically, he had no option but to contest this and take it to a duel in terms of honor and everything. And he was acquitted because there was deemed to be no malice aforethought, because he didn't. And all the times he kind of went through every angle to try and avoid a duel, but the banker just kept pushing him. So yeah, that was the last fatal duel in Scotland, and it fell out of favor anyway not long after that, to be fair. So that is the long and short of it, but there you go. It was the last recorded duel in Scotland there.
Fascinating. And now, is it right after that sort of dueling went out? I mean, do people just have a punch up after that? I mean, if we go back like, I don't know, 60, 80 years, was that more the culture? If you fell out with someone, you'd have a bit of a punch up?
Well, I mean,
Blokes,
I
obviously,
suppose so.
not ladies, but
Well, actually, interestingly, back in the kind of late medieval and early sort of modern period, women were quite often involved in duels.
okay.
And because equality and everything, the man would be buried up to his waist and in earth to give the woman a fighting chance.
Right,
That was
okay.
sort of when it was swords and that kind of thing rather than pistols. Once it became pistols, it was mostly between men, although sometimes women did do it as well. Because they could be dishonored in various different ways as well. And it was kind of an upper class sort of thing. The aristocracy, really, they participated in duels. The lower classes, for one thing, they couldn't afford guns. But the swelling of the middle classes was actually part of what made dueling fall out of favor, especially with pistols. They kind of, because there were more and more people joining this class, it became less of an elitist thing. So it just became seemed just a little bit silly after that. And because it had been, made illegal at that point as well, I suppose attitudes were changing. Things were becoming a little bit more liberal, dare I say. But the main argument to keep dueling alive, because they do still happen in different places around the world. It's not just because it doesn't happen here anymore, doesn't mean that it doesn't happen elsewhere. But essentially, it's a matter between two individuals. So what right does the state have to interfere? Essentially, is one of the arguments to bring dueling back. But it was an argument that was used when the law was changed around dueling as well. It's nothing to do with the state. If two consenting adults want to shoot at each other, then what does it matter? It's I suppose. And as a vaguely libertarian type person, I don't really have a strong argument against it, to be fair.
Okay, I'll have a go. How about, well, if you've got an NHS, it's a bit of an imposition on the NHS, isn't it? To be
I suppose so. I suppose if you forfeited your right to public health care in the event of you being shot, then so either you die in terrible agony or you have to get private health care. That's, I suppose,
the Human Rights Act would probably come to your defense. Now, let's think of another one. I mean, would you not have a situation where if you want to kill someone, you just go for a stroll with them in the woods, take a couple of pistols, shoot one, and then say it was a duel? I mean, would that be a danger?
I'm sure it would be, and I'm sure that probably did happen on occasion. But you would have to, because usually duels were announced, and and it was a very public kind of, I challenge you to a duel and all this kind of stuff. So you'd have to go through all that, really.
It was like that when I was at school as well, with fights.
Did someone throw a glove down and go, I challenge thee?
No, but there'd be an appointment made and the crowd would gather at the appropriate place. Did that happen when you were at school?
Yeah, absolutely. It was usually, meet me outside the gates and I'll deck you, that sort of thing. But yeah, despite duels being this, they were always publicly announced, but they didn't give the time and the location to everybody. It was just that it was a big kind of, you saw him, offend me or whatever, wasn't it? And then it would be, I challenge you to a duel. And they would do it in front of loads of people, because if the person said no, then they were seen as a coward by everybody. But they never actually said, right, in front of everybody, like you did at school. They didn't say, oh, meet me at such and such a place at such and such a time. Although they did, they would always have to have a second there. So each duelist would have someone there to make sure everything was fair, make sure the guns were loaded properly and all that kind of thing. And then yeah, they would have to invite doctors there as well. Although they always said, be vaguely in this vicinity at this time of the morning, so that the doctors couldn't be actually accomplices to the duel happening. So,
yeah, well, I would say this is one area where there's been progress, very definitely. I mean, I think we're much better off without the dueling culture.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So there it is. Okay, that was very interesting. A little aside for us before we go into the other issues. There, we've got a few comments here. Yes, indeed. I should have said that at the beginning, shouldn't I? Yeah. Happy St. Andrew's Day.
Happy St. Andrew's Day, everybody.
There's a question. Would you like to answer that question?
Yes, tailed feature is indeed a spoonerism. Yes. When I started my YouTube journey, I was, shall we say, disenfranchised student teacher. Things didn't really go to plan, and I thought just calling myself failed teacher was a little bit bleak. So I like a bit of a spoonerism, so I came up with that. The unfortunate thing is some people think it's to do with being a furry, but it's not. You're correct. It's a spoonerism, and yeah. So well done. Good for you getting that. There are some people that have known me for about 4 years now, and they still when and they find out, oh, is that what it means? All right, okay.
Yeah, I was one of those people. I wasn't quick on the uptake there. Dueling keeps men on their toes. Well, you're very welcome to that opinion. Yep. Here's an interesting. So just a bit of a diversion. This dueling. We'll move on to other more mainstream issues in a minute. Well, let's imagine dueling was suddenly made legal again, and you could arrange your duel, and the police would come along and bring the pistols and the various. You entered it in a special place. Would people still want to do it? Would you still get people signing up for it?
I think so, because I think a lot of duels, for one thing, in most cases, people weren't actually found guilty of murder, despite even when it was illegal for a very, very long time. It was decreed, by various monarchs to be illegal, but actually secretly they liked it because they would usually be involved in it in some way. They would usually get to officiate it or whatever. So they went, yes, we're going to ban this practice, but then secretly, actually, we'll just let it slide. And usually, because it was the upper classes that were involved in it, the monarch didn't really want to put his friends and advisors, to the guillotine or to the gallows or anything like that. And quite a lot of the time, people they deliberately missed this when it came to pistols anyway. With swords it was slightly different because actually it would just be first blood, that was it. Obviously with a pistol you've more chance of causing serious damage very quickly, but yeah, essentially most of the people, I suppose it's kind of like they worked out in the Second World War, the guys on the front line, most of the time they fired the guns just above the heads of the enemy because they didn't really want to kill anybody. And I think it's kind of the same thing. I think if duels were still to happen, I think most people would probably, I'd like to think anyway, that most people would either just fire into the air or they would deliberately miss, because it is more about the spectacle, really. A lot of it's to do with that anyway. So, so yeah, maybe people would sign up to it.
Just one last thing to clarify before we move on. Just want to make sure I've got this story straight because this is going to go into my library of anecdotes here.
Okay.
So you were saying that in Scotland, in a duel with a woman, a man and a woman, the man would be buried up to his waist to make it fairer.
I'm not sure that was definitely in Scotland, but
all right,
that was a thing that happened. Whether or not it was, because quite a lot of dueling happened in France. I can't remember off the top of my head where that kind of duel happened. For example, in France, I think it was in the 1400s, a knight murdered his fellow knight, buried his body, and the only witness to the crime was the deceased knight's dog, and the dog kept attacking this knight, and so eventually led people to the shallow grave where this knight was buried. And because the dog kept attacking the knight, they sort of went, oh, wait a minute. Was it you? Was it you? Sort of thing. And he was like, no, I'm really offended at this. So they went, right, okay, you're going to have a duel with the dog. And he was buried up to his waist and had a sword to attack this dog. And the dog quickly basically just went for the guy's neck. And that didn't kill him though. He then admitted to the killing. Just get the damn dog off me was apparently what he said. And so they went, okay, we'll get the dog off you, and now we're gonna hang you for murder. So yeah, it's mental, absolutely mental. But there we go.
Yeah, I suppose we're into some sort of intermediate stage here between like the ducking stool and whatever, and modern times. So they're getting there. They're getting there.
Yeah.
Right, that was extremely interesting. Right, so let's move on to something more mainstream.
Something a bit more modern, up to date.
In fact, right up to date. Now, I'm sure everyone is wanting to hear more about the Omicron variant of coronavirus. So that we could have a general chat about the whole COVID lockdown type things. I mean, we could start from the sort of broadest level. I don't know your take on the whole thing at all. But where are you on the spectrum between it's a hoax and everyone should be locked up if they're not wearing a mask? I have to say, your mask is one of the best I've seen. That must be highly protective.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely, yeah. It protects everybody from viewing my face as well, which is pretty good for most people, I would say. No, I'm fairly central on this thing, in the sense that I do think COVID is a thing. I don't... I think people are going to be affected by it. However, I do think it's something that we're probably going to have to live with for a long time. So are lockdowns effective? Probably not. In terms of just general, how plausible is it to keep people forever locked down? That's just not going to work. Society can't function like that. So I'm against it in that sort of principle. Lockdowns anyway. I don't think that mask mandates work particularly well either. I personally would have taken the approach that, especially right at the beginning, was if a business wants you to wear a mask to enter their shop, they should have been allowed to do that. Equally, if they said you could just, you don't have to wear a mask to come in here, I would have been fine with that as well. Because then you get to choose. Do you go into a shop that mandates masks, or do you get to go in the ones that don't? I think that would have made a lot more sense. We wouldn't have had to just shut everything down. Absolutely. So we can't keep going like this forever, is essentially it. I know, obviously, again, people are affected by it in different ways. People with underlying health issues are more affected by it. So I think if people wanted to lock themselves down and isolate themselves, I think that should have been up to them as individuals, really. But maybe this actually shows us that perhaps we shouldn't be relying so much on the NHS if it can't cope with all this as well. So it's been quite eye-opening. I do get quite, maybe upset isn't the right word, but despondent when I go into social media and you just see everybody seems to be so polarized on this. And it's been a very, very sort of tough year and a half. Just seeing people ripping each other apart. Families have been torn apart. You see people posting saying, I'm not having my family or this family member coming round for Thanksgiving dinner because they're not vaccinated, and blah, 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 blah. It's insane to me because I'm pretty laid back. Let live. That's kind of what I'm all about. And it just seems to be relentless and so polarized.
The polarization, I agree. It's just been amazing. Where on one side you've got people who are like following all the rules to the letter, like gives new sense of purpose and meaning to their lives.
And virtue, or perceived virtue.
They really love it. And the other side, you've got people who are, well, I suppose if you go reality, actually, you're into all the conspiracy theories and things, but then you've got people who are just so ardently, refusing to wear a mask or get a vaccine or whatever. I mean, there is this real polarization, and I think people are sort of in the middle, end up a bit reluctant to say what they think.
Yeah,
because they know exactly that the people at the extremes could really fall out with them over it. So you tend to get a sort of silent center ground, I would say, and I think that's what's happened. Now, here's an interesting question. See if you can help me with this one. I mean, it seems basically, politically, people on the left seem to be, we want more lockdowns, more rules, more everything. People on the right of politics are more, no, we need to just get back to normal, face the risks, but carry on as normal. Why has the issue broken down left and right like that, do you think?
It does seem like that. I'm not entirely convinced that it is, but maybe a preponderance of people on one side about lockdowns. Maybe that is actually true. Maybe most people are, but I mean, for me, I've always said I'm about centre left. To be fair, but I'm all about smaller government, less government and intervention and whatnot. So obviously that's just from a personal point of view. I think for whatever reason, and again, this is kind of broad generalizations, and this is partly why we're polarized, I suppose, is because broad generalizations are easy to make. These sort of sweeping statements are quite easy to make. But people on the left these days seem to be more authoritarian than those on the right. And it's a pendulum thing because, when you look at certain issues, you look at, for example, the idea of sort of free speech and everything. So back in the 80s, you had Mary Whitehouse and her ilk, and they were conservative right, and it was all the lefties that were going, no, but free speech, people should be allowed to say this, blah, 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 blah. It's completely reversed now, as far as I can tell. That's not to say that everybody on the left is anti-free speech. I'm not saying that. But generally speaking, people who at least align themselves with left-leaning parties and ideas have moved away from that. And I don't know if it just swings backwards and forwards. I mean, is it
the most powerful section that've got the temptation to authoritarianism?
Maybe, yeah.
Minorities want freedom.
Well,
majorities want control.
I think part of it is a digging of heels, basically. They don't want to relinquish any power. So as soon as you challenge them on anything, you actually push them further into authoritarianism. There's probably been loads of studies and stuff done on the psychology behind all that sort of thing. I'm no expert, but yeah, whenever I say something about pretty much any topic, so say it's something to do with Scottish politics. So if I say something anti-SNP, people go, well, you're a Tory then. Oh, what about the Tories? What about the Tories? And I'm like, well, I hate them as well. So why is the assumption that because I oppose something the SNP do that I must be the opposite? That's the kind of dichotomous thinking that people seem to have, and I think social media makes that a lot worse. Like the way that we're talking just now, I think because you can be more nuanced and you can go, well, what I meant by that was blah 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 blah. Whereas on Twitter, you've got whatever it is, 280 characters or whatever it is. That is a very small space in which to fit everything in. There is no room for nuance, and I think people aren't really interested in nuance either because it's an instant gratification thing. It's easier to look at one tweet by somebody and go, well, I'm just going to discount everything they've said because I think they're on the left, or I think they believe in this, or because they believe this one thing, they must be politically aligned with whoever I dislike. You know, it's laziness. Actually, it's intellectually lazy, I would say.
It's tribalism as well. It's people.
Oh yeah,
people just wanting to be in a crowd that agrees with them, and social media algorithms oblige us all with that, don't they? That's what they serve up for us.
Yeah, and
it's more of what we choose.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is because the left, especially, have a history of protesting various things, various topics. That gives them a sense of community. I mean, I've not been on protests so much. I've never been on like a big march or anything like that. I have gone to view some. There's something in the atmosphere. It's camaraderie. There's there's this sort of unifying thing. I could see everybody's filled with endorphins and everything like that. Everybody's going around, it's having a good time. We're doing the right thing. And it's that positive reinforcement that makes you go, right, okay. I must, this makes me feel good. So I must be doing the right thing. I must be doing something positive. So yeah, the right doesn't really have that so much. Or at least historically haven't had that. So it's interesting to see the anti-lockdown protests, the anti-vaccine passport protests and stuff like that in these various different countries, because they're being touted as right-wing or far-right by various bad actors because, again, it's easy to do that. I don't think they even believe it themselves. It's a far-right position to hold. But obviously, it's sort of just pointing and going, look at those people, they're bad. That's basically what they mean by that. They're actually quite a dare I use the word diverse group of people in terms of their political ideologies. There's no one person, there's no one ideology across in these protests about passports and what have you. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that, actually. But I probably wouldn't. Would I go to one? I suppose. Yeah, I'm getting to the point where maybe I probably would. It was not to say that I'm not politically active. A lot of the time it's because I don't want to get involved in herd mentality. But there comes a point where I think you do have to demonstrate that if it's something that you're passionate about, then maybe actually you should go to one of these protests. Don't know yet.
Family party policies for a long time have been for a return to normality. Basically, that's all aligned with coronavirus. That's our underlying principle. Thing with this protest, the things that concern me is the proportion of people there who have, in my humble opinion, have sort of lost touch with reality to some degree. And it would be quite a sort of conspiracy-minded group. But like you say, there'd be a variety of people there. I mean, let's just have a look at this. Let's get a comment there. Right, sure. I'm talking about the coronavirus vaccines. Fulfills none of the criteria. Its effects are nil. I mean, do you really believe that all these, I mean, how many vaccines are there now around the world? It's about 20. That every one of them has been through a testing process, and that what do you think the scientists have made it up? Do you think? I'm just confused how you could think that they don't have any positive effect at all. Because that would have to be a worldwide conspiracy, wouldn't it? That every one of the 20 vaccines made so far, there's been some controlling force that's made all the scientists and companies and academics or whatever, that they've all lied about it and pretended that it works.
I mean,
that sounds quite far-fetched to me. That's difficult to swallow.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion. I can understand that people maybe think it's been rushed and that there weren't enough rigorous testing done. I can understand those kinds of arguments. But I mean, I can't even get the government to come and collect my bins every week. Never mind a worldwide conspiracy about it. So I have to say, Occam's razor suggests here that actually, there could be issues with the vaccine, but some big conspiracy for us all, I don't know, getting 5G implants or something like that. No, I don't buy that, I'm afraid.
Me too. Yeah, I think vaccine, if people want it or don't want it, then that's up to them. I would urge them to look into it from to understand the scientific side of it or whatever, and then make a decision on that basis. Remember, a booster, I mean, I've had my first 2 vaccinations. For a booster, I've also had coronavirus as well. So the thought of a booster, I'm inclined to think, well, it's like when the flu vaccination would come round. When I was working, the sign would go up saying, you can go for your flu vaccination at the medical centre if you want it. When I never used to have it, I thought, I have flu every now and again. It's not that bad. I'd rather just face it when it comes. So then with the coronavirus, I'm sort of feeling the same way. But then you won't be able to travel to Europe if you haven't done the right boosters.
Well, this is. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of the same opinion as you, that if people want to get the vaccine, they can. I've had both. That was mostly because I was working in a test center, so I was definitely more likely to get it. So because I was coming into contact with people with it, this was quite early on. So I got them. I'm probably not going to bother with the boosters. Because at this point in time, I'm pretty much just living by myself in my house. I live alone. I go out shopping and stuff like that. I do lateral flow tests. So if I don't have it, if I'm demonstrated that I don't have it, I don't really see what the point in even wearing a mask is, because that's the other thing that people say is, masks, they stop you from getting it. Well, no, they don't really. And then they went, well, actually, no, we'll change our view. Actually, it's to stop you from passing it on to everyone else. Like, right, okay, that's fine. Except I've done a test and I was negative this morning. So why do I have to wear a mask when I go into the shop? Because I don't have it. And if I do get it, well, that's on me, isn't it? If I do get it, yeah, okay, I'll isolate until it passes, until I feel better, until I get a negative test. Yeah, I mean, I think that is more than reasonable. At the start of the pandemic, I did wear a mask all the time. I did everything that was sort of asked of me. But yeah, it's now got to the point where we can't go on like this forever. And so I think masks especially are just a bit pointless now.
Now, if I was Boris Johnson and this new variant came along, I'd be feeling that the danger is to be being accused of being complacent. If it does turn out to be a bit worse, as far as I'm aware, there's no evidence that it is. It might even be milder. But you would fear being blamed for people dying, being blamed for being complacent, being blamed for taking action too late. So that's where you're under attack. You're not really under attack for damaging the economy or restricting people's freedoms. That doesn't really bite so much in the media. And certainly not in the Parliament. You're not going to have the Labour Party complaining about that. So I think for Boris Johnson, politically, the easier option, the safer option, is to be imposing restrictions, is to be seen to be doing something.
Yeah.
Even if the advice is getting that it's not necessary, even if he himself and the cabinet are thinking it's not necessary, from a practical point of view, from a political point of view, I think maybe it is necessary for them.
Yeah,
because
and if there's a political decision to mask us all up, I won't do it. That's basically it. And obviously here in Scotland, we've got Nicola Sturgeon, who basically goes, we're going to do the same as what they're doing in Westminster, but even harder. We'll keep the mask mandate. We'll introduce vaccine passports. It doesn't matter if they don't actually work, and actually the technology behind it was completely broken, and actually they're easy to fake and everything like that. We'll do it anyway because the Tories have said they won't, or they don't have any plans to, because we are so righteous. Well, no, actually, that obviously just blew up in their faces, and they're now quietly undoing all the vaccine passport stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think if there's any attempt for a lockdown at Christmas, what proportion of the population are going to obey it?
Well, that's the other thing, isn't it? You've got to the point where, yeah, I was in ASDA earlier on today, and yeah, there was a couple of members of staff wearing masks, and a couple of the punters that were in there, they were wearing masks as well. The majority of people weren't bothered. No one was socially distancing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to the point where I reckon everybody's going to get it in some form or other. And obviously, as I say, it affects people definitely. I like to think that I'm sort of young and healthy enough that it's not going to affect me too badly. I've kept some food in the freezer just in case I do have to self-isolate or anything like that. So those are the kinds of precautions that you really need to take. Okay, you get it right. To stop this from spreading to anyone else, I'll not go outside for 10 days or 14 days, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
I think that's as much as is reasonably could be expected of anyone, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think with it affecting different people different ways. One of my symptoms was hot feet. I've never heard of anyone else having that one.
Oh,
hot feet.
I read a story about I think it was a teenager or something having COVID feet. I can't remember if it was specifically hot feet, but there was something to do with, it was like COVID toes or something.
Yeah, COVID. Yeah, that's like chilblains and scabs.
Right.
On your toes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have that. I know people who did.
But, you had a special strain then, obviously.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Special variant.
Yeah.
It's gone now. Right. Let's move on. Time is flying. I mean, the other two big issues, and we could go to climate change. We could go to immigration. I forgot to mention that before. Let's go to climate
just bring
change.
that on me, why don't you? Immigration. Yeah. Not that contentious issue.
Let's go to climate change. I don't know anything about your take on climate change. Where are you on the spectrum there?
I actually made a video about this a couple of years ago because up until about, I don't know, 2017, 2018, I was all about, we need to reduce emissions and all this kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of it was actually from more of a pollution point of view than specifically the planet heating up and all that kind of stuff. Because I'm more concerned, well, I'm just one person. I'm more concerned about what I see round about me and stuff like that. But eventually, because again, this debate got so polarized, I got to the point where I was like, I don't really care anymore. But it's putting it in a nutshell anyway. I'm all in favor of nuclear power. I don't think we can rely on renewables at all. The amount of effort and energy it takes to make a wind turbine that lasts for about 10 years or something like that is probably more than you'll get out of that wind turbine. I'm no expert. It just seems to me they're also a blight on the landscape. Whereas if you've got a couple of nuclear power stations, dotted across the country, then I know you've got a problem with waste and everything like that, but that's still less of a problem, I think, in the long run because you get so much more energy out of it. Again, people use this to completely just virtue signal and we're saving the planet. The UK needs to go entirely carbon neutral by this date and all that. Even if we did, it wouldn't matter because America, China, and India are pumping so much CO2 into the atmosphere that it would be a drop in the ocean what we did. So I don't know why there isn't more effort. If the people were genuinely concerned about climate change, why aren't they doing that? Why aren't they trying to change the minds of or the policies that are in these other countries? I realize it's obviously a lot more difficult, but if their joint efforts could be put towards that, then maybe they'd have a point. But when they say to me, no, you need to stop eating meat, and oh no, you need to not have any children, and oh no, you're going to have to start, eat the bug and live in the live in the pod and all these kinds of things. At that point, I'm going, no, again, I have done as much as reasonable for me. I have reduced my meat intake. I mean, to be fair, I don't really like meat all that much, so that wasn't much of a sacrifice. But I try and recycle things as much as I can. I go litter picking and things like that because, well, especially during lockdown, that people were just dumping stuff everywhere. So I was going around cleaning that up and things like that. I get my milk delivered in glass bottles, things like that. It's as an individual, that's about as much as you can do reasonably, I would say. I'll walk places as much as I can, and part of that's to save money. It's not just because.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's one of these things. It's so divided. Again, you've got the people who are like, no, everybody must, live in, smaller houses, and most of it's impractical. The stuff that they're asking us to do. So somebody's making money from this, and that's what kind of made me very, very cynical about the whole climate change stuff. I'm not saying it's not happening. I just think that the things that we're being asked to do as individuals, isn't going to actually achieve very much when you've got these countries like America and China and India, as I mentioned. That's the kind of the main thing. And B, I don't think the people that are telling us to do this, I don't think they're going to do it. You've got Nicola Sturgeon, for example. Oh yeah, we're going to be a green economy now. Excuse me, while I fly around in my helicopter to different things. At least I have no real time or respect for Greta Thunberg, but at least she went to America on a boat. At least she sort of stayed true to her principles. I was like, actually fair play to you for doing that. You're still obnoxious, and I still have no time for you. But at least you didn't get a chartered private plane and go.
The crew had to be flown over or something, didn't it? Do you remember the story about that?
Oh,
I can't remember.
Yeah. I get that. Yeah, and I know it was probably partly a publicity stunt as well. But it's like when people say, "Oh, you need to become a vegan" or anything like that. Well, it's like, to what extent? Because, right, if I give up milk, for example, that means there are going to be fewer dairy cows around, which means slightly less methane in the atmosphere. Whatever, right? Okay, I understand that. Right. So, vegans, do you have anything that has been made that involved chopping down the rainforest? Oh yes, you did. All right. So how many animals were killed or displaced and that? To what extent do you take it? So again, it's about being reasonable. I would say it's about common sense.
There's a lot of things that I think it's up to the government to decide. So I don't want to wander around the supermarket agonizing over what sort of packaging is most environmentally friendly or whatever. I mean, the supermarkets can either decide for themselves, or if the government wants to change the laws on packaging, that's fine. But I'm not going to be sort of doing great research on that. Now, in Christian teaching, where Jesus's big enemies were the Pharisees, and what they did was they specialized in making up little rules that were actually really easy to keep. Then they were really self-righteous and pleased with themselves because they could keep these trivial little rules. And I feel with the environmental issues, then I think you can end up with the same situation. But people can do things. It's not really a big sacrifice. You buy a different sort of this, that, and the other. They're quite small decisions, but you can talk about them for a long time.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people are getting a lot of mileage out of that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think you're right. I think collectively, if we all do a little bit, that's fine. Again, I just don't have very much faith in the government. I don't trust them. When you must do this. As soon as that happens, I'm like, whoa. Again, the inner libertarian just comes out and goes, "No, I'm not going to do it because you've said I have to do it." So I think a lot of it is, especially due to climate change, is one of these things that social pressure is probably better than sort of is better than it being from the government in terms of if there's a campaign, a social campaign to stop I don't know, certain types of packaging or something like that, and the supermarket goes, okay, we've listened, we'll have biodegradable packaging or something. I'm fine with that. I'm absolutely fine with that, and that's also not really a climate change thing. Again, that's a littering thing. That is a waste thing, So maybe we should just go back to how things were, and you got everything in paper bags, and I don't know.
Slight diversion. We'll come back to climate change in a minute.
Okay.
So you're self-described libertarian. So how about seatbelt laws? You happy with those?
See again. When you come to these kinds of things, I don't really like using the term libertarian because, again, it's one of these things. There's a wide range of things. Dare I say it's on a spectrum? It kind of is, So I'm quite socially libertarian in that I think people, generally speaking, should be allowed to do what they want as long as they're not hurting anyone else. That's generally speaking my point of view. Seatbelt laws, at one time, I would have said, yes, I'm 100% in favor of them. And I am still in favor of them, generally speaking, and this harks back to what we were saying earlier, because we have an NHS, anything you can do to sort of stop yourself from being taken to hospital, as far as I'm concerned, is quite a good thing, because of how prevalent the need for public healthcare is, or how reliant we are on it. That's not to say then, because it gets quite murky, all this kind of stuff. And this is probably why I couldn't be a politician, is because I start thinking about something and I unravel my own idea, my own point of view. I get why seatbelt laws are there. I do think that there are certain things to do with the driver of the vehicle being responsible for, I think, is it people aged 14 and under wearing their seatbelts?
Something like that, yeah.
It's something like if you have an accident and there was a 14-year-old in the back of the car and they didn't have a seatbelt on, actually the driver would be responsible for that, because the driver has to make sure that they've got their seatbelts on. I'm kind of okay with that because you're starting to talk about children. But yeah, are you more likely to hurt someone else by not wearing a seatbelt, as in another driver? Probably not. So I don't know. I don't really have strong views on this.
Yeah,
but I
think another angle could be from the point of view of the national interest. And you said about we don't want people to get hurt, people to hurt other people. But if someone has an accident and say a parent of a few children is killed, then that's had a very serious effect on other people. So the government could say it's not just about protecting the person who's having the might have the accidents. It's about protecting their family, other connections as well.
All right, I see what you mean. Right, because that person has died and that has an effect on others. Is that what you mean? Right.
So it's like saying to children, we're going to try and make sure that your parents stay alive. We think that's really important. Right. So even though your parents are a bit careless and they're inclined to be a bit reckless, we're not going to let them do that because we think you need them to be around. So I'm sort of okay with a bit of paternalism from the government.
So should the government then say, well, you should stop smoking because you're going to die and you're going to leave your children as orphans or something like that?
I think with smoking, I think the government's approach over decades has maybe been about right, and that they've been maybe tightening the screws, not the right phrase, but they've been basically building up pressure on smoking, that they've been trying to damage its public image. They've been trying to restrict it in various ways. And their goal is to eliminate it. Basically, eventually they'll make it illegal. When there's only a tiny, tiny number of smokers left, they'll make it illegal. But they're doing it by various other means along the way, which I think is probably Probably right. Okay, just on smoking though. Do you know how many people die of smoking every year in Scotland?
I have no idea.
About 9,000.
Okay.
9,000.
Is this going to be a segue into drugs by any chance?
Well, we'll see. So about 9,000.
Uh-huh.
So you would think, if you look at the coronavirus, measures that were done with coronavirus to save people's lives, real like turning society on its head, shutting everything down. But with smoking, these cigarettes that kill 9,000 people a year, you can just go down to the shop and buy some.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems to me like a total mismatch. I can't see how the same standards are applied. If you do the lockdowns for coronavirus, smoking should have been banned decades ago. It certainly should be now.
Well, I suppose the cynic in me would say that the government gets a lot of tax revenue from cigarettes. That's that's why they haven't banned it. Same with alcohol.
With cigarettes, too many voters as well.
Well,
but it's maybe getting to the point where they're not so bothered about that.
Well, I suppose if you've got a comfortable position in Parliament, if you've got an 80-seat majority, for example, you probably don't. That's not really high on your high on your agenda at that point.
Yeah. Anyway, back to climate change.
Oh,
that was an interesting diversion. Nuclear power. I agree with nuclear power. I think when people say, apocalypse is coming, we're doomed, extinction is upon us within however many decades, there's only so many years to save the planet, then you say, okay, well, nuclear power, that's got no global warming effect, so surely we need to do that. No, but because we don't like that. It just makes me think, I don't believe you. If the situation is really as dire as it's portrayed, people would be willing to consider anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the fact that you get a bit of nuclear waste that you need to deal with, okay, it's not ideal, but we've been dealing with it for a long time, successfully. It just undermines the credibility. There's a lot of things like that. I'm a sort of, sort of undecided about climate change. I find both sides find it hard to convince me. Whatever statistics are given, I'm not quite convinced by them. So so I basically don't know. The other thing, this comes from the academic establishment. It comes from universities. On every issue where there's the opportunity for politicization in an academic subject, it gets highly politicized and highly left-wing. Yes. On every other case, I know. Yeah. And so what should I expect with this case? It sort of undermines my confidence in the science. The output of the science department.
I'm exactly the same, because, as I say, up until a few years ago, I was, oh yes, definitely, the planet is warming and it's all man-made, and it's this, that, and the next thing, because I watched loads of videos breaking down the statistics and everything like that. I do think that the planet is gradually warming up. I do think we contribute to it. To what extent, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't really understand these things. I don't proclaim to understand these things either. And that's another thing. There is nothing wrong, and I'll say this to all your viewers, there is nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. Right? That is a perfectly valid position to take. If you don't know something, don't make it up. Don't just go to the first result on Google and go, oh, well, that's my mind made up. Just say, I don't know, I need to look into it, or I'm unconvinced, because saying I'm unconvinced isn't a positive position either. It's I don't know, essentially. And that's absolutely fine. So I'm kind of the same position now, because of the polarization and the politicization of every issue. And seeing how corrupt academia has become due to leftism rampantly working its way through every strain of academia. I now go, I don't know what to believe. I don't know whether I should believe this scientist. Do they have a hidden agenda, or have they been
if I was a young climate scientist wanting to make my mark, I wouldn't be writing papers that say, "Oh, not quite sure, maybe not as bad as it seems, can't quite tell." I mean, you go nowhere with that, are you? But if you get the real, "Oh, well, it's worse than anyone ever thought," then you're the star. And they say, the scientific consensus, the way science tends to work is there is a consensus until eventually it dawns on them that it's wrong, and someone comes up with a new idea, and then gradually the consensus moves to something else. And during the consensus period, people who disagree with it, I mean, often you're not seen as a scientist, you're excluded from that community. So there's all these things that just it basically means they've got a harder job convincing me.
Well, yeah, because that's what science was about. It's like this, to the best of our knowledge, this is, because with the evidence that we have, this is the position. And some other evidence will come along which would contradict that. And they go, okay, well, we'll move now. But now it's like, oh, well, this is what we say is happening because of the evidence. And if you disagree with it, you're racist. Actually, all criticism of this is no longer allowed. And at that point you go, wait, when did this become a cult? How did this happen? Yeah. And so every area of academia is like that now to some extent, which it makes it very difficult to actually believe anything that comes out from scientific centers. Yeah.
When I was at school, I don't know, 15 or 16, there was a new subject introduced, environmental science. And I can remember I did it for a year, and the main point of it was to tell us that oil was going to run out. I think by the year 2000, that was roughly the doomsday. Oil's going to run out. Life as we know it is going to completely change. So we've got to find alternatives to using oil and fossil fuels because there's just going to be none left. Now, at the time, I didn't really take much interest in it. I just wasn't very interested. But if we went back in a time machine now, I mean, the people now are saying, what the scientists are saying, you just definitely have to 100% believe that. So should I 100% believe that when I was told that in the mid 80s? Well, I think obviously not. They got it wrong. And the other thing that makes me think is, to what extent have they just got it in for fossil fuels? Is it like they've got it in for nuclear power? Because it just somehow it's not as natural as having a wind turbine or hydroelectric or whatever. So is it just something a bit more subjective? I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, going back to your smoking thing, there was a big report that was done. I can't remember what decade it was. I want to say in the 70s that said, smoking doesn't give you lung cancer. Who actually did that study, or who paid for that study? It was some big cigarette manufacturer. So. Yeah, you sort of go, well, who paid for all these studies into renewables? Was it a company that actually makes renewables? And equal, the same thing could be said about the vaccines, the COVID vaccines. Like who did it? Was it actually a big pharmaceutical company that did it? I don't know, and that's the thing. I can't. It's got to the point where I don't know is my answer to most things when it comes to scientific. It used to be that I used to think this, that, and the next thing. I'm still pretty convinced that the Earth isn't flat. I'm still pretty convinced about that one. But all these other things, I go, I just don't know anymore. I don't know who to trust. I don't know who to believe. And especially if you read stuff in the media, it's all heavily editorialized and biased. And so, I don't mean to sort of end that on such a depressing note, but that's the position that I'm in at the moment, is that I don't really know what's real anymore.
There's something I saw just quite recently. It was saying that you're saying about like who's paying the bill. I mean, the oil companies apparently are really keen on renewable energy, so they're very much promoting it. And apparently, the theory is that they promote renewable energy because they know if you have renewable energy, that you're still going to need fossil fuels to back it up.
Yeah.
So they don't want nuclear. It's interesting. I don't know how true that is, but I'm sure those sort of dynamics exist and will have an influence on the overall message that we get. I mean, generally with science, I tend to trust scientists because they've got the the best methods, processes for dealing with this sort of things. They're very clever people, but the Earth's climate is extremely complex, and I doubt their ability to predict it or to understand it particularly well. I'm saying that they're the best people doing the best job they can, but I'm not sure how capable they are of making accurate.
Well, that's
predicting what the coronavirus is going to do. I mean, that should be absolute child's play compared to predicting the Earth's climate. And yet, the predictions for coronavirus have been all over the place, haven't they? Often.
Well, yeah, and again, how much of that is down to sort of a lack of understanding, or is it actually maybe it is something that we just don't understand, and everybody's just putting a brave face on and saying, "Oh, this is what's happening with it." I don't actually know. But yeah, the way that science is done is the best method that we have, so long as it's done kind of properly. But the fact that you now have the whole thing being undermined by sort of the critical theory approach to things, where you say, well, science is actually or the scientific method is just one way, one way of finding out things. And actually, we have other ways that are equally as valid, and they're always things, and that's how we know that you're racist or you're this, that, and the next thing. You just go, well, no, actually, no, that's no. What you're talking about is subjectivity, whereas, scientists they don't specifically talk about objectivity, but they are trying to deal with reality, things that can be proven to the best of their knowledge, whereas the social science side of things, the critical theory side of things, that's they don't do that. They don't do that at all. They have their predetermined conclusions, and they try to find whatever they can to support that, which is the opposite of what you should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got about 20% through the topics that we had to talk about.
Oh, wow.
But that was good. I enjoyed the chat. With all these other topics, we'll have to have you back before too long to carry on talking about it.
I'd be glad to be back. It's always good chatting with you, Richard.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed that. Thanks for the comments as well. We put a few on earlier on. There's quite a debate going on in the comments.
Quite a debate, yeah. I've been reading.
We'll maybe try and bring more in next time, but we will conclude there. So farewell. If you watched it later as well, I hope you enjoyed that. Right, thanks very much, Mr. Feature. And until next time, bye for now.
Dankjewel.